Okay, but I don't see it. I don't see it. One second. Okay. So you see the slide that says main UN principal organs, right? Do you see that? Okay. Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, let's continue. Um, okay. And then you have the Security Council, the General Assembly, which is the Parliament of Nations. It is a beautiful parliament. You have time when we can do when we're able to do that. When you can do a nice tour of the UN, and you go in the morning, and they have tours. I mean, you can see the entire United Nations. You can go into the library. You can see the General Assembly. So when it is possible to do that, I recommend you to do the tour. Maybe some of you have done it in the past. Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. So it's a nice experience. I recommend it very much. Um, if you are if you are if you have a citizenship of another country too, you can also. I did this. I mean, I'm only a U.S. citizen, but I don't have any other citizenships. But one day I interviewed people in the Chilean delegation, and they took me for they did their own tour, right? They walked me around the UN. Um, but again, diplomatic delegations sometimes do that. They meet with their citizens. Oftentimes, if they're students, and they walk them around, right? They take them to the office and they walk them around through the UN. So you can do that. The General Assembly, you have 193 members today. That could expand in the future. We have many self-determination claims around the world, in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, Europe. General Assembly is always open to expansion. That's the nature of the General Assembly. You have the Secretariat, which deals with daily administrative workings of the UN, right? Translation of documents. They publish a daily agenda for the issues that will be discussed each day. They publish that. You can find that in the lobby when you enter the UN. All these kind of things, right? Kind of administrative aspect of the votings. Who will be the General Assembly? The the general secretary of the General Assembly. All these logistics are defined by the Secretariat. You have the Economic and Social Council of the UN, that is a council. This is formed the countries that are they want to join. They join. Almost all of them are members of ECOSOC. That's the way it is called. And they discuss global economy, and they discuss regional economies and national economies all the time. The Trusteeship Council, which, as you know, this is the body created by the UN to deal with decolonization. In the late 1960s, the issue of Puerto Rico was taken out from the agenda. Puerto Rico was one of the more urgent cases, also with the African countries. Think about 1960s, Algeria, Angola, Mozambique, and then in Latin America, you have the case of Puerto Rico. Then you have Vietnam, in Asia, many other cases. So the Trusteeship Council was there as a council to implement decolonization, because it was indeed an urgent problem, right? It was a permanent point of conflict. And the trusteeship is also in Asia. You have islands that belong to Japan that were taken over by the UN and were given to the US as a trusteeship, as part of the Trusteeship Council. So with all these islands, Palau, Samoa, Micronesia, the US acted up until the 1970s as a country that will monitor the decolonization with the assistance of the Trusteeship Council. That's the way that worked, that council worked. Once Africa became independent, Puerto Rico became a Commonwealth the U.S. Lobbying Congress to stop submitting reports about Puerto Rico. It was very embarrassing. And the Trusteeship Council kind of lowered its mandates into a lower level, and it reduced its mandates because the General Assembly considered that decolonization was not an issue of a pressing issue for the world anymore, and the cases that were left were effectively monitored by the organization. So the Trusteeship Council in the late 60s, I'm sorry, was converted into the Decolonization Committee. And a committee is a committee within the General Assembly that discusses special policies and also decolonization issues. So they have every year this meeting on July that people from colonial peoples come to express their dissatisfaction for being left as a colonies. And you have that monitoring. You have that monitoring every year. But it is not the Trusteeship Council that was created originally with those teeth to together with other countries effectively decolonize peoples. It is not like that anymore. It's just a monitoring body. It is called the Decolonization Committee, or the Committee of the 27, because it has 20. I'm sorry, the Committee of the 24. It used to have 24 members. Now it has 27 members. And then International Court of Justice is another branch, other organ, body of the United Nations, and this is the court that decides any claim that is brought by any country is determined here. Issues of international public law. All of this is ruled, investigated in the ICJ. And then the ICC, which is International Criminal Court, deals at the global level at the demand of countries of the General Assembly. With that mandate, it deals with human rights violations and genocide around the world. That's why the ICC, International Criminal Court, created the court on Rwanda, the court on Serbia, and so on. Okay, it's not moving forward. 1 second. Okay. Now it's working. And this is the structure of the United Nations. If you can look at your left, you can see the General Assembly and all the programs and initiatives that falls under the authority and budget decisions of the General Assembly. So countries every year they vote for the funding that will go for each of these agencies. You have all of them here. UNDP, UFPA, which is the UN Population Fund, Habitat, that deals with housing, UNAIDS, and so on. UNOPS deals with UN operations around the world. I mean, you can go on and on. You can check all of them. World Food Program. And these agencies operate in all the countries that want these agencies to be established and to work in their countries. If the country considers that they have assistance, they need help in food distribution, or for example, in issues of local development, if they need assistance on issues of trade and free trade, if they need assistance from the UN on environmental programs to fight climate change, all these organizations, they do the work because the countries, some countries demand their presence in their countries, and therefore the UN, or the so-called the UNDP, which is the coordinator of all the UN agencies in all the countries where the UN operates. The UNDP is in charge of drafting an agreement between that country and the UN system, and that agreement is a huge research with a lot of data that both parts have to agree with, and that sets the kind of cooperation that the UN will give in a permanent basis in that country, all right? So it is called the United Nations Development Assistance Framework. It is called UNDAF, United Nations Development Assistance Framework, UNDAF, UN Development Assistance Framework. So that's the document they signed. The UNDP representing the UN agrees, the country agrees, and then they move along with the agenda in the country. The Security Council have right these committees that countries of the Security Council take part of willingly, voluntarily. Peacekeeping, sanctions committees, international criminal tribunal, etc. I mean, genocide, issues of invasions, etc. This is where Russia and China voted against the U.S. resolution to invade Syria, for example, or to intervene in Syria militarily. You have the ECOSOC, the Economic Council, okay? The countries are part of this, and the Economic Council monitors the economic commissions in a regional basis. I mentioned that last class. I mentioned the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean, CEPAL, right? It's a regional organization. Countries are part of that. They have also a parliament in Santiago, Chile, but they're monitored by the Economic and Social Council, which is the headquarters here in New York, all right? And then you have some specialized agencies that deal with economy, social issues, financial issues that have to do with economic, social well-being. These agencies then fall within the umbrella of the ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, right? And then you have the Secretariat that deals with logistics around the world. All these are UN agencies that deal with logistics and special committees around the world, globally. And then you have the Trusteeship Council, which is which today the Decolonization Committee. All right, so in a very schematic way, this is the way the UN works. It's a very complex organization. And then the issue of the veto power is something that is very much criticized. Veto power is blamed partially for the inefficiency of the UN in very critical issues, because any country can veto and then the UN ends up doing nothing, right? But again, the US has to convince the Soviet Union to enter. This was an idea led by the United States, and the Soviet Union was very adamant to join the UN. And in the Yalta conference, there was this discussion, and the idea came out of having veto power. And the Soviet Union, Stalin was very much attracted to that idea, that the Soviet Union would not lose power by becoming a member of the organization, and that the UN will reflect the new balance of power in the world after the end of the Third Reich and the end of the World War II. So the veto power was a consensus between the country that came out of the war victorious, and it was the only way to convince this country's powers like the Soviet Union to enter. And again, a UN without the Soviet Union at that time would have been a very ineffective multilateral organization, because that would have been an organization that would be cut along ideological lines, and therefore would be very ineffective to resolve disputes and issues of war in a diplomatic, collegiate way, right? And that's why you have the veto power. It's something that should be reformed. The way to reform it was to add 10 temporary members, but without veto power, then we have to ask ourselves the question, this is something that we can discuss later, if the US will be willing to be a member of the UN without a veto power, also other powerful countries like Russia. That means that without veto power, it means that all decisions made in the organization had to be made by consensus. And if they're not made by consensus, then they might pass some declarations, but without any real effective capacity to execute them. So veto power gives political force to these decisions when they are made. Without veto power, you take the risk of having an inconsequential organization that cannot execute anything because the countries never agree on anything, right? So it's a debate. It's a permanent debate. It's a very heated debate. And then you have the peacekeeping forces that have been present in the issue of Kashmir for the last 70 years. You have peacekeeping forces since day one there. You have in Palestine. And that's something that has been very successful about the United Nations. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Because I saw that my
Yes.
internet is unstable. That's what I'm asking. Okay. So peacekeeping forces are there.
Yes.
Peacekeeping forces, funding, also Latin American countries have been very active in peacekeeping operations. And those are the peacekeeping forces. I mean, they have the mandate to interfere, to intervene. Nigeria is a country that has been key to the in the funding and also in authorization, also with the African Union of peacekeeping forces in different areas in Africa. Peacekeeping forces are there when they have the mandate and they have to defend themselves. They will engage whoever, whatever belligerent force, they will engage it with military power. So they have that power. They have the power to defend themselves. And in peacekeeping forces, you have a structure that allows regions and also the UN as a multilateral organization to satisfy and to cater to these needs of peace in very conflicting places. You have one permanent one in Haiti, which is called the mission, UN mission for the stabilization of Haiti. And these became the first UN peacekeeping forces in Latin America, completely administered and controlled by Latin American countries, Argentina and Brazil and Mexico, also Uruguay to lesser extent. Other countries sent soldiers and sent funding, resources, supply for this continuous effort of the UN in Haiti, okay? And then you have, as I mentioned, peacekeeping forces were key to the Iran-Iraq war ceasefire, etc. I mentioned Pakistan and India. I mentioned, right? We have so many cases in which peacekeeping forces have been a defining force that have been successful in stopping direct conflicts. This is okay. Just now moving to the next slide again. Let me. It's stuck. Okay. Okay. Maybe this way will work. And then another defining moment for multilateralism was indeed the demise or the end or the decline of the Soviet Union. Remember that the multilateral system was always right after the end of the World War II defined by a world that was divided in two big ideological poles, right? The Soviets and the Americans on the other side, and this bipolar world structured very much the way in which the UN functioned. Right? The UN was very much paralyzed for a lot of things. This is the era right after World War II that you have a lot of proxy wars. So the UN never play a role on stopping those really ideological conflicts in Africa. We have Nicaragua, Cuba, Grenada in the West Indies. The US ends up invading Grenada, also Cuba. So the UN never had play a big role during the Cold War in terms of peace and war. It helped a lot of countries, as I said, to decolonize and to develop their governments and to establish institutions. That's for sure. But in issues of war and peace and on the critical aspect of these bipolar world, to prevent wars, for example, the UN never really played a role because the international system operated according to the bipolar logic, right? And then you have Now the world without the Soviet Union, the 1990s, after the end of the Soviet Union, you have new ideas that emerge from the international system. The UNDP, for example, the General Assembly, um, the secretariats, the political bureau of the General Assembly. They started producing literature and research that try to persuade the world that there was another way in which multilateralism could define threats, right? That now, without the threat of communism and the Soviet Union, right, the world and the multilateral system have to define, all right, what kind of threats are now the real threats of humanity. If it's not now if now the revolutions and guerrilla warfare was not the main problem for most countries in the world, right? Remember that a lot of these civil wars in Nicaragua, liberation process in Africa, it was funded and inspired by the Soviet Union and the ideas of socialism, right? Angola came out with independence as an independent socialist country. Nicaragua came out of a civil war as a socialist country ruled by a Marxist political party, the FSLN. So now without these kind of conflicts in the world, because the field was not there, which was the Soviet Union, right? So the need became to be this need to secure people's lives around the world, and the work became to define what kind of threats is now the world facing, without now in a unipolar world led by the United States, right? What kind of threats is humanity facing, and what kind of threats the UN should address in order to continue being relevant in the face of humanities and nations. So in 1992, the UN published Agenda for Peace, and it promoted concepts that became to be kind of groundbreaking concepts in the area of global governance and multilateralism and diplomatic studies, like human security, right? And human security became a key concept that explains all these areas in which the humans are under threat that are not necessarily military threats, right? What aspects of life threaten the well-being of peoples that have nothing to do with military or police insecurity or threats, right? Or military threats. So the Human Security Report, which is also called the Brahimi Report, Brahimi, he's still very much a very respected scholar that have worked as a resident, a representative of many UN agencies in the world. And he came up with the idea of human security, and he said, we cannot talk anymore about national security, right? Why? Because there's not really a global threat of guerrillas or socialist parties or communist parties. As a matter of fact, in the 90s, a lot of communist parties changed their name into other more nicer names, right? So he said, the threat is now coming from any military source. The threat now is coming, right, from non-traditional sources, right? And he mentioned the lack of governance in a country, the lack of institutions in a country, the lack of the capacity of the states to supply clean water, to provide education to its people. So Brahimi was very, he kind of catered very much to the need of the moment with this concept of human security. And human security deals with all the threats that do not allow human beings to reach full security, right? And he said that we have to move from the military understanding of threat to the human dimension of threat, right? That's something that became a breakthrough with also the concept of human development, helped the UN to transition into other explanations of how to deal with conflict. And then preventive diplomacy, peacekeeping, peacemaking, post-conflict peace building, all these concepts address the need for the UN to become an agent of change and protection of human rights before, during, and after any conflict, right? That the UN's job was not to intervene in cases of direct violence, that the UN has to follow up, that the UN has to be present throughout the peacekeeping process of any country, okay? This is the UN reform. So the UN reform in the 1990s proposed transformation of the UN. It happened partially. For example, one of the main changes with the Treaty of Rome, early 1990s, was that the UN will add 10 more members to the Security Council, that there will be a coordination of the UN in each of the countries, led by the UNDP, and so on, right? So all of this was decided, these small reforms was decided by the General Assembly and also Security Council. I have mentioned here in other classes the role of non-governmental organizations also in global multilateralism and global governance, right? These agencies, almost all of them, they have non-state permanent members in the General Assembly. And they are non-state permanent members because they have to be there in all the discussion of the General Assembly and bring the reports and talk to the delegations to inform the countries of the latest developments on specific issues in different regions and on different areas, all right? A lot of them are non-state permanent members. And then you have another thing that moves global governance is are these human rights organizations, non-governmental organizations that deals with specific social economic urgencies, human trafficking, drug trafficking. Think about Greenpeace, Transparency International that deals with corruption globally. All these reports inform very much the foreign policy of countries and how the General Assembly behaves. All right. Foundations, again, all these foundations, Open Society, which is from George Soros, Bill Gates Foundation, Aga Khan Foundation, which I believe is a Pakistani foundation, Ford Foundation, Clinton Foundation. We know that the Clinton Foundation became a big subject in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, where there were cases of corruption. But again, international NGOs help countries, and they fund specific projects in areas always coordinated with the national governments, right? They always also play a role at the local level. The Aga Khan Foundation, they have had for the last 20 years money to build parks for children in countries that have suffered wars. So they go to the neighborhood, to poor areas, and they bring and they build parks for recreation for children that have experienced wars, right? That's the case of the Aga Khan Foundation. And then we have terrorism, that we know that's a problem. Now with one bad aspect of trade liberalization and globalization we mentioned is that also crime can travel and cross borders more easily than before. And they have become a global actor. I mean, the US foreign policy up until Trump, it was all shaped by this concern of terrorism. I mean, from George Bush all the way to Obama, terrorism was one of the big areas that kind of took all the attention from the US foreign policy. Latin America, African countries that are always looking at the U.S. leadership on different issues. They had this concern, right? The U.S. have been looking at the Middle East and only about terrorism for over 15 years, you know? Some people even suggest that this is why allowed Maduro and President Hugo Chavez to win the elections and to become such an attractive political force in Venezuela, the country with the largest oil reserves in the world, because the U.S. became very invisible, right? There was not any